rise in power. And that matters more than ever now. So Dr. Hudson.
So can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. Don't normally need microphones, but just always like to ask. So let me just echo the sentiments. I really appreciate you guys coming out today. This has got to be close to my 20th presentation in this room since I moved here in 2019. And considering at times it's just been me and the host, I appreciate you all being here for sure. Second, I'm originally a professor. So currently I'm serving as the Assistant Provost Academic Innovation Outreach at the University of Lincoln. I also happen to be serving as the Dean of the College of Professional Studies. So anybody that's known me over time, I don't know how to wear just one or two hats at a time. I like to juggle them in the air. The reason I tell you that is because I always approach things from a scientific standpoint. It is the basis of my training as an academic. I say that because there is a lot that I would love to comment on in a more emotional or visceral way. But I'll be honest, just regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, I'm hesitant to engage those dynamics in today's political environment precisely because I don't sense emotion moving the needle. In fact, I often find that it's the emotional reactions that are somehow kind of overriding and consuming the more rational attempts that are being made to understand what's going on. And so, to be clear, I have very honest and personal opinions about our current president, for instance. But I try very hard not to let those taint my presentations precisely because the moment I do, the very people I need to hear me the most shut off. And so again, I tell people I think I'm a great professor or a great political speaker for no other reason that I have the ability to tick off both sides relatively quickly and easily. I take that as a compliment. When talking about identity, this is a topic that's extremely personal to me. Being half black and half white and growing up, born in 1970, I'm now coming to the point at the age of 55 where I can honestly begin to look back and see some really significant substantive changes in our society and culture during my lifetime. And not just from a textbooky type perspective, but knowing I lived it. So trying to explain to my students at Lincoln, for instance, that 3 years before I was born, it was illegal in 2/3 of the American states to have a biracial marriage. And that's, oh, well, at least you were born. No. 3 years, that culture that supported that sort of perspective doesn't go away. Those things linger. And so trying to get the current generation to understand some of the perspectives about race, gender, identity, sexuality, political leanings. I'll be perfectly frank with you. There's a part of me that looks at the American political landscape today, and I don't recognize things that I spent decades studying, starting with the Republican Party, to be perfectly frank. Just what I grew up with, I might not have liked everything Reagan did, but at least I understood why he was doing it, and might not have agreed with his goals, but at least I understood where he was trying to go. I kind of lost that compass today. So again, when I'm talking about identity in America, I tend to do it from a much more theoretical perspective, conceptually, because one of the things that I think sometimes, again, undermines our conversation in this point is the tendency of not just Americans, but human beings in general, to rely on stereotypes as their markers for identity. Even this relatively small group in this room, it would take me weeks to get to know each and every one of you to be able to define you in my mind in an individual way. I got in an argument with a professor or early colleague of mine, being a very young African-American professor in a all-white department. We got into this conversation about stereotypes, and growing up the way I did, it was a 4-letter word. Yeah, there was no positive to a stereotype. And he, as a sociologist background and political science, he's like, listen, you might not like them, but they're actually essential to all human interaction. It is the base. Now we could talk about how they're formed, how they're used, but in the end, if we didn't have those markers, if we didn't have at least these pre-established understandings of identity, we would all founder when it came to social engagement. It's been almost 30 years since he gave me that argument, and I tell you now, it still goes through my head. because I almost have this kind of dual response when I find myself relying on a stereotype. Maybe somebody that's walking down the street that, oh man, that homeless guy, oh geez, he just got in a car. I guess he's not homeless. Ooh. You know what I mean? We all fall victim to it, even the best of us, so to speak. And so the reason I talk about stereotypes is because in many ways, I think they tend to symbolize what I would argue is one of the first and primary mistakes that is made relative to the idea of identity in America. So the question that I'd like to start this afternoon with is, how should the citizen identity be defined in America? Now, the reason why I think the identity of citizen is so important is because, for all intents and purposes, the identity of citizen acts as an umbrella over all of the other identities that potentially exist within American culture and society. Whether we're talking about cultural or political or economic, all of those identities in one form or another fall under this concept of citizen. One of the arguments or one of the assumptions that you need to know that I make: identities are socially constructed. And I'll stop there for a moment. There is no such thing as an objective truth when it comes to identity. Every identity is the result of human interaction over time and a compromise over, okay, that's what we're going to call it. Quite literally, there was no concept of man and woman before two human beings with different genders started looking at each other and going, huh, you ain't me and I'm not you. What are we going to call each other? I mean that in the most literal sense. So one of the analogies I use is, so we all look at that, immediately identified as a table. What if I went over, put a pillow and a blanket on it and went to sleep and then called it a bed? Could you really argue against me? The moment we recognize that identities can be changed through compromise and interaction is the moment we have to accept none of them are set in stone. I'll put it another way. If identities were absolute truths, 3/4 of this presentation and most of the arguments in American society wouldn't exist. We wouldn't necessarily agree about the value, man, woman, Christian, Muslim, but no one would be arguing over what those things meant. But we do. And part of my argument today is going to be that not only do we argue over those things, but the arguments tend to be rather unique in the American context for a variety of reasons. So the other thing I should say is, I know that generally speaking, you guys like to lay this out as kind of 40 minutes presentation and then 20 minutes. Man, I do not like to hear myself talk that long in a row. So please ask questions. I will stop mid-lecture and ask you questions. To me, I'm much more of a kind of Socratic method. I like the back and forth. I'll tell you what, I tell my students all the time, the best classes are the ones that I learn something too. And if I'm not engaging my students, then I'm cutting off my opportunity to learn. So please, if you got questions, comments, please feel free to jump in. So again, identities are socially constructed. So that means, how do we all get to the point where we're actually agreeing on an identity, like citizen? Identities are fixed through the application of power. So it's not just a group of individuals saying, okay, man, woman. It's the individuals within that group with the power to then say, as a man, this is what you'll get from society. As a woman, this is what you'll get. And then modern society creating laws to enforce those things. And again, you can start to think, I could roll out 20 different identities, and you would immediately begin to be able to see or identify certain legal structures that then define what their responsibilities, roles, and benefits are within our society. Children, taxpayer, married, divorced, retired. I could go on and on. Identity, if it didn't have that connection to power, if it was just a matter of, so who are you? And who am I? Oh, that's great. Pleasure to meet you. We all just kind of walk around meeting people, not meeting people. It wouldn't really have any significance on our lives. But I guarantee you, you are going to react differently if person one that you meet is a teacher and person two that you meet is a police officer. Because You already know there are differential identities, characteristics, and thus sources of power associated with that identity. Let me stop there for a second. Questions? Anything like, oh my God, do I have to sit the whole 50 minutes? No. Okay. Assumption number 2, identity politics is the process through which a society determines who gets what, when, and how. So again, this fixing of meaning, the creation of laws, customs, and norms that determine which identities get what from a society. The bottom line is it tells us who gets what, when, and how within that society. That's the purpose of identity formation, and that's the basis of identity politics. It's that constant back and forth between the various identities within a society to figure out ultimately who's going to get what. Assumption number 3, identity politics in America is unique. This is my own theoretical argument, but I'll be honest with you, the more countries I've visited in my life, the more I'll stand by this statement. It is not that other societies don't have identity politics. They absolutely do. See women in Saudi Arabia over the last 20 years. See North African immigrants in Spain, Italy, and Greece. Again, they have identity politics. But my argument would be that identity politics within other countries tends to focus more on the conflict between the established identities rather than actually trying to define the identities themselves. The uniqueness of America is that we are literally arguing over certain identities, citizenship being one of the classic ones, that most other societies have already fixed long ago. Again, we can argue whether or not the Basques should have more power within the Spanish government or should they be independent. But no one's arguing what a Basque is or what a Spaniard is. And those arguments, again, this is my theoretical, as I told a gentleman earlier, I'm not here to tell anybody how to think. I'm just offering you my framework of how I analyze and assess things. You can take whatever pieces work for you. You come to the same conclusions that you had when you walked in, when you're leaving, all good. As long as I can argue that I gave you some additional tools to have a more nuanced understanding of not just where you are, but how you got there, then I've done my job. That's the way I look at it. So, again, from an American standpoint, my argument fundamentally is identity politics is different in this society precisely because we are still arguing over things that other societies have actually fixed long ago. Go ahead.
So I noticed that you said that identities are fixed through the application of power. It doesn't specifically say political power.
Oh, no.
So would we consider social power or force of use to matter as much? For example, like non-binary folks.
I would argue that prior to the development of the modern state system, so we're talking 17th century on, 18th century, and even then it absolutely wasn't uniform, and I can find kind of more traditional states today where it's still an issue. Ultimately, the power to fix those meanings tended to come from the singular leadership of that society. So I decree as the Holy Roman Emperor, boop, 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 and that's the law. It's still the same exact process. Only today we're using legislation, bills, and police officers for enforcement. Back then it was, are you going to defy the king? But the very notion, power, fixing meanings within a society, that's been, I would argue, it literally, we could go back in the time machine and sit in front of a cave somewhere and see a couple of cavemen arguing, I'm the hunter. I should be getting a bigger share of the deer. I'm serious, like very seriously. That concept, I would argue, is as proto to the human existence as the creation of fire. In fact, I bet you that was one of the first, hey, I'm the one. Keep messing with me. It'll be cold tomorrow night. You know, because that's just kind of human nature, at least my perspective. Other thoughts, questions? Yeah, please.
So when we talk about citizens and my idea, the function of the government is to collect the taxes and then equitably and fairly and fiscally distribute them among all people in society, specifically those that need them. So based on that framework of essential duty of a government, with all this immigration reform and then pointing fingers about the Biden administration versus the Trump and everything, why can't we take that term citizen and kind of wipe out the ethnic diversity and the different lifestyles and say a citizen is somebody who pays into the system with, like you said, taxpayer, and then we start with that as the basis for the immigration reform. Do you think that's possible?
So it's you actually bring up a couple different points there. And so the first one I would argue, it is easier to consider that kind of legalistic understanding of the responsibilities of government and precisely those sorts of societies in which the idea of political identity is more firmly established. I think immediately of Scandinavian countries. There's a reason why you got countries like Norway with like 87% happiness index, because they're all the same. There is no issue with identity. Literally, the biggest identity issue Norway's had to deal with in the last 50 years was joining the EU. And even then, the only real question was whether or not this new identity was somehow going to dilute what it meant to be Norwegian. But it never impacted what they understood to be Norwegian. The second response I have to the point that you made, it's one of the paradoxes. I'll be perfectly frank. It's one of the paradoxes I would argue exists for American citizenship as an identity. We all tend to understand our roles with the government in that somewhat legalistic way. I'm paying my taxes. They should be providing me better education, better security, borders, whatever it is. But what if I argued that the paradox actually comes from the narrative that we use to establish the country? In fact, I would argue that the constitutional narrative, in many ways, was everything but legalistic, especially when you consider the impact of things like the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights. There was, again, this is one of those funny things, because it almost elicits simultaneously a pride and then a willingness to throw up your hands and get into a fight. Because in many ways, the vision that the Founding Fathers laid down is perhaps the most idealistic and pure vision of government you could possibly imagine. But again, it was based more on these understandings of what citizens would be able to do within that legalistic framework, not necessarily the boundaries of the framework itself. I know that's a long-listed professor type answer to your question, but so again, the bottom line here, the definition of a citizen is most contentious in America due to the way it was initially defined. So how was it initially defined? Early on, the concept of American citizenship really focused around this core question. What did it mean to be American in a world of empires, and who was excluded from that identity? So believe me, so I live the mantra, walk in another man's shoes. All right, so full disclosure, just being honest, I am an absolute closet nerd. I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons since I was about 6 years old. I love video games and role playing and working on my own fantasy book right now. I love what if it was like? I love that kind of open mind and so I literally have thought about making this slide. What were the thought processes of the first colonists? Literally, the rocking in the boat, they got another month and a half before they get to Plymouth. What are they thinking about with regards to what they left behind and what their thoughts and anticipations were about what was in front of them, especially relative to the concept of identity? Let me put it another way. The one thing they knew on that ride, and by they, yes, I'm talking everybody from the Plymouth all the way down to the Virginia colony. The one thing that they were considering relative to the idea of identity is what they were no longer, not what they were becoming or already thought themselves to be. This, to me, is an essential part of the story. None of the early Americans came here with a preconceived notion of what it would mean to be an American citizen. They all, in their own ways, began that journey by defining what they would no longer be relative to a citizen of the British Empire. You guys following so far? Radically different understanding of coming to the question of who am I? Okay, let me put this as direct as possible. I think the aggressiveness that exists within American culture today is because so much of our initial attempts as a national community to define ourselves was based solely on who we weren't. And as those thoughts progressed, we increasingly found ourselves in a position where we now had to defend our perspectives. And the first way we did it was by de-emphasizing the relative equality between the identity that we would eventually develop, American citizen, and all of the identities that we started by saying, that's not us. It wasn't just that, oh, I'm not British, or I'm no longer going to be part of the English church, or hell, I'm no longer European. It was then, man, that church, all they did was hold us down and they denied us our ability, so that church was bad. Oh man, those British aristocrats, they stopped my ability to advance my family lineage economically because I didn't have the right title. Oh, those damn elites. And so we developed this, I don't want to say hatred, even though it definitely comes across that way sometimes, but we don't have a whole lot of respect for all of the other identities, precisely because we had to kind of scratch that. Nope, that's another one off my list. I'm definitely not that. I'm definitely not that. And in convincing ourselves what we weren't, we had to come up with reasons why. And most of those reasons tended to be negative or pejorative. U.S. defines itself first and foremost against Europe. And these are themes. I know the language might have changed, but I'm telling you, the philosophy and the mindset is exactly the same today. Anti-monarchical. Sound familiar? We're literally doing no king's days. 300 years later, and the same exact message is at the heart of what it means to be American. I don't know what American is, but I sure as hell know it's not a king. That's it. That's all I need to know. Next. 2, anti-aristocratic. America is having a really tough time with this one. Really tough time. Because, and again, this is just my own argument, throwing it out there. On the one hand, we hate elitism, just as a general society. And again, I personally believe it literally goes all the way back to your average middle class. It was very rare to have a landed elite coming over on those early trips. It actually, ironically, it wasn't until most of the land, or at least the initial settlement, was created by your middle class, your laborers, that you started to see the landed gentry come over and try and establish their own manors and farms. That's one of the reasons why you had the development of the Southern plantation culture and society. And from this perspective, we've always hated that elitism. But for us, it's a caveat. We don't like elitism that you didn't work for. But if you worked for it, well, Elon Musk, I guess you get all the power in the society you deserve. That's a dilemma for us. Because on the one hand, the ultimate, the billionaires, on the one hand, they represent the true completion of the American dream. But then at the same exact time, their behavior and power within the society brings up our hatred of aristocracies and elite power structures. The only thing that's kept the Elon Musks of the world, some of these really, just super, super rich, as a really functional and, quite frankly, revered part of American society by a lot of people, my argument is that they still, to a certain degree, represent a real possibility for the average American pursuing the American dream. If the average American no longer believed they would ever get to that level, no matter what they did, I think you'd see more social upheaval and backlash, right? But as long as, and what's really funny, because I grew up, and so this will ring true, I grew up, literally there was still this belief, okay, just give me the right 6-pack and 2 weeks in the basement, and I will invent a better refrigerator. I don't need a college degree. I just need to be good with my hands. The Ace Hardware's open. I can get this done. Am I overly? I'm sorry, but when I grew up, there was this idea that if you were just innovative enough and you worked hard enough, you could literally discover or create something that would then move you up that path. Okay. Huh?
It did work to an extent. You're looking at Apple being formed in the garage, but Elon Musk didn't make himself. He inherited money before he made anything of himself, and people forget that.
Well, you see, you guys, you're nitpicking now. Next, you're going to tell me that Trump started his career with $3 million loan from his father. Come on.
Yeah, his father, yes. But that does beg the question: is the American dream obtainable for the average versus someone who has a little bit of a leg up?
So it's fun. I didn't intend it, but it's funny that we're down this road. So I moved. No, I because I actually have directly engaged the question you just asked over the last 6 months, and it was kind of a shock to me. So I moved here in 2019, got a job as associate professor at Lincoln University, started teaching in the political science department. 21, got the first position as the interim dean of enrollment management, and off and running. I'm going to be honest with you. The last 5 to 7 years, I'm like, okay, I'm definitely on the American dream now. I am doing everything I'm supposed to. I'm working super hard. My salary's increased. My titles have increased. Man, I'm ready. Okay. So this past fall, me and the wife, son's getting ready to graduate from Rockbridge High up in Columbia. So we're thinking, okay, now's the time. Maybe I can now move down to Jeff City, be closer to the job. And I've actually made some decent inroads in the community, and I wouldn't mind being politically active, but I got to be in the community to do it. So now's the time. I looked for a house for exactly 6 weeks, and it hit me. I think I passed. I think I was the last generation in which the concept of that, okay, work hard, get this, do this, you'll reach this critical mass of salary, and then yes, the white picket fence, the 2.5, kids, the dog, it's all going to be right there for your taking. And I've done what I was supposed to do. There's no hope. No hope. And I say that seriously. I mean, I guess I could literally leverage myself to the hilt to have a little bread box. But to me, that's not the American dream. I'm supposed to be able to afford something that I find comfortable. And no. And it's not like, oh, I just missed it. The housing market, I'm talking to real estate agents, like, look, you literally are going to need to call me every Monday morning because the houses that come up are usually sold by Thursday or Friday. They don't even hit the listing. And oh yeah, be ready to offer 20% above market price because that's the only way they're going to look at your offer. Oh yeah, and we haven't even talked about down payment yet.
And the average person can buy a house in their 40s now.
And so
you're looking at 55.
And I mean, I listen. If you had told me I was going to be where I am now, financially, professionally, now, I would have been like, man, I'm going to be living high on the hog. I might even have an extra half kid. Who knows? And it just. And so it's funny you asked that question because I got to be honest with you. I've been rearranging my entire calculus after that experience. I'm probably not moving down to Jeff City anymore. Just because I am comfortable in the place I am. And so all of a sudden, what my American dream was is fundamentally altering. What I thought was going to be my twilight years, where I'd be, ironically, now I'm like, oh man, I guess I'll just take that mortgage payment and travel. So I'm already shifting into a whole nother gear. But the idea of that traditional American dream, that's gone for me. Please.
You mentioned like work hard. I think it's been tweaked a little bit because I've been hearing like, I can't make it with this job. We'll get a second job. It's like the bar keeps raising how hard you have.
And that's been happening for a while. Because I kind of started to experience that when I was in grad school. I mean, when I was in grad school, I was taking a full grad load, working full time, had 2 kids under the age of 5. I mean, and adjuncting. And it seemed like, okay, just do what you got to do. Like, it wasn't like I was, complaining and moaning my way through the day. It was just what I knew I had to do. But here's the difference. I still believed I'd get the payoff on the end. You know what I mean? There was a purpose for it. Looking back, I'm proud that I worked my way through it and, did what I was supposed to do. But I'd be lying to you if I said, you start me back at that square one again, that I'm going to do everything exactly the same, knowing what I know now. Probably not. And the other dynamic I would add real quick, my own opinion is that the part of the devolution, if you will, of the American dream has also been related to the pathways. So as you mentioned, as I talked about, I think work was absolutely work hard. That's the most direct path. The second one, which in my opinion has been attacked by levels of anti-intellectual in this country that I still don't fully understand, but the idea that we no longer consider education to be a path has really thrown me for a loop. And that both, to a certain degree, have been replaced by a belief that actually the two easiest and quickest ways to get to that dream, lawsuit or lottery. I maybe I'm being cynical here, but the number of people that don't work as hard as I think they maybe should, but they seem to have this perception in their head that, well, next week, my landlord's been doing this, I'm just going to sue him. Okay, if that's the path. And again, to me, it's part of this understanding of how has American citizenship changed? Because again, it's not just the identity. It is what we believe we will get from society as a result of that identity. Yeah.
I'd argue that currently the most popular method people expect to get them to a place like that would be social celebrity. That's generational. Yeah, now that said, there are some individuals I've seen on there calling themselves influencers, and I'm just like, are you sure? Like, you look like you're sitting in the DMV right now. What are we doing? But even then, it's just, forgive me, it's a growing belief that achievement of whatever dream might be left, or however you're defining it, now has to begin with what is the lowest amount of effort I have to put in to start this journey. That's what throws me off. So the third, and this is going to make you guys really laugh, the U.S. defines itself against Republican virtue. Now, again, for those of you that might have studied history, or especially European history, Republicanism in Europe is a decidedly different concept. Okay? It is not a party concept like it is in America. It is a governing concept. And republicanism in the European context, especially, again, we're talking 16th, 17th, early 18th century, was much more exclusionary. That's one of the reasons why the American democratic experience really upset the apple cart so big, because the majority of democratic states were actually Republican in nature. And so the idea of representation and power within the system, it wasn't your aristocracies and your monarchies of the previous age, but it sure as heck wasn't for the people, we the people. There's a much more narrow understanding of how government interacted with elite structures, especially economic structures, to then create the rules and dynamics for the rest of society. Early belief in American exceptionalism, a new kind of nation with a moral mission. Is anybody in here familiar with the concept of American exceptionalism? A little bit? I know, for those, I'm trying not to bore those that were kind enough to come to my learning and retirement class. Some of this might be repeat, but at the same time, it offers different perspectives. So American exceptionalism, it is not just the belief that we're better. It is not even the belief that we're the best. It is the belief that we are wholly unique. There is no one else like us. And that uniqueness is born from, for many Americans, a truly religious source. God himself has ordained that we are who we are. And here's the great, the interesting part of that. How do I know? Because we are who we are. If I was wrong, how did we win World War II? How did we, How did we beat the Russians to space? And how did we? I could go on and on and on. American history, for many, clearly justifies our cultural belief that there is no one else like us. Go ahead.
So with recent events, in Iran and with our government, do you think that that's gonna change if it continues? Because it's the first time in my life that I've gone, whoa, we are, not maybe the first time, but really hit where we're not special.
Listen, there are, and again, I've studied this stuff for most of my life, to be perfectly honest. And as I told my wife, listen, if you can get your average Canadian to turn and look into the camera and use a 4-letter word explaining Americans, you know you've gone into the next dimension. That's just not how they do it. I'm not saying they've always liked us, but Canadians, that's just not how they approach. The British, for people not paying attention, little things that make a big signal. The British, French, and Italians recently told the United States Air Force that they could not fly military missions in their airspace on their way to hit Iran. That is a first in the history of NATO.
I was watching the space shuttle, the landing and everything yesterday, and I was so proud, and I was watching it, and it felt so American. And then it was over, and I turned the channel, and there was the news, and I was like, yeah, it was like it.
Well, even that.
We're taken back to we're the good guys, and
perfect example. Like, I am sure there were some very significant Chinese scientists watching the Artemis mission who said, do they know that we actually put something on the moon last year? Like, they flew around it. We stopped. But hey, so that's part of that uniqueness, right? And to answer your question more directly, no, I don't think it's going to change too much, because here's the irony of our narrative. We might shove it down people's throats, but we're not always wrong. There are unique aspects to America that do not exist. We're the only country in the world that has the capability of satisfying all of our natural resources domestically. The only one. Relative to your comment in particular, the moment we start to get significant pushback, we'll go neo-isolationist in a heartbeat. We've done it before, we'll do it again. And we can. Why? We are what England always wished it could be, untouchable by our enemies. I don't care how much you dislike us, how much you want to get at us. Man, do you know how much Iran and North Korea right now are wishing they weren't 3, 4, 5,000 miles away? But they are. And that's why, in my mind, comments and actions like what we see in Canada are actually more of a problem than some of the other international responses and dynamics we're seeing. Citizenship is deliberately narrow. So what's really important, and this is perhaps something that's most overlooked in the current birthright citizenship debate. The early definition of citizenship in the United States, and when I say early, I am literally talking about founding in the first colonies all the way up to the 14th Amendment, end of the Civil War. Early conceptualizations of citizenship in the United States started with the state you lived in. The idea of national citizen identity was literally just a byproduct of the fact that the state you were a citizen of happened to be part of the United States. It absolutely was not the first concept of citizenship that Americans had at the time. You were Virginian first, then you were part of the United States. Even after the Constitution, after the Articles of Confederation, your citizenship was driven by your state location first. Questions so far? Go. Go. See, they're paying attention.
And this refers to the previous one, and you got that one. But my question would be, don't all countries believe that they're exceptional? You were talking about Norway, for example, a while ago. People are most content, happy. That's that's something that they could pride themselves on.
So
They were exceptional in that way.
special. So, and again, I'm just thinking off the top of my head as a clear response. My first response, honestly, it's hard to continue to think of yourself as being a truly exceptional group after somebody took you over and occupied your country for 50 years. And that's happened to just about every other country in the world, including your advanced European states. There's no European, listen, despite the French's best efforts, the Germans will remind them very quick, you're not as special as you think you are. And then the Americans will turn and look at the Germans and go, you're right. But we're the only ones. We're the only ones that have never suffered a long-term occupation or invasion like that. And that changes your perspective on what uniqueness and exceptionalism truly is. Absolutely, but see, and that's the narrative. If we weren't blessed by God, we wouldn't have our geography.
Or tectonic shift leading.
And you know what? You can call it whatever you want. We call it exceptionalism.
But it goes back to identity, because you're speaking as part of the dominant culture. If you're a member of an indigenous nation, occupation has been over 500 years.
Listen, and that's a really important, I need to be clear. This is not me standing on a podium with my finger waving at the average American going, you're immoral, you're unethical, you're terrible people. No. I would be willing to bet that you take any other society or culture in the world, you give them the advantages that we have geographically, and they would end up in the same space. Okay, I'll give you a really poor analogy, but it's just because it's where I come from. I'm a diehard Yankees fan. It's hard for me not to be an arrogant bastard just because. I mean, I'm not a bad guy, but if you want to start talking baseball, get to me when you got 26 championships. Then we can talk. And I mean, it's just this natural power. It's why does that mantra even exist? Power corrupts. You don't have to be a corrupt person you can have the best of intentions, but it's a rare individual that then gets that power and doesn't start to see themselves in an elevated position relative to the other identities that they might have even intended to use that power on behalf of.
You do realize the Yankees are buying their championship.
Yeah, we've heard that all the time. That's what the jealous people say. I want to get to this one part because I think it's really important for understanding our identity as citizens in this country. Our identity is not based on practice. It's based on a contextual statement of the moment. I am free. I am not necessarily acting freely. The concept of freedom as part of American citizenship is this kind of blanket statement that the expectation is it's the individual citizens that will define that box for themselves. You figure out what freedom means. All we're supposed to do is give you the box, the ability to operate in that space. That's one of the unique aspects of American society. And again, one of those great paradoxes. I think if you ask the average American, if you ask the average non-American, they would tell you that one of the greatest single aspects of being an American is freedom. I've actually gone on a limb and said to my students that the single most overlooked freedom in America, the one that's most cherished and least discussed, is the freedom to do nothing. Do you know how many democracies there are in which it's actually a crime not to vote? That's a responsibility as a citizen. It should be here. Is that what you said? That'd be antithetical to what we understand being American is. I mean, and so again, the point I'm trying to get to is from the beginning, and again, forgive me, I like analogies because they tend to take the big, but sometimes I come up with really wonky analogies, so I apologize ahead of time if this don't make sense. If most other societies are a glass of water, relative continuity from top to bottom, I tend to look at American society as soda water, a collection of bubbles. Yes, they're all in the same container, but they're all individualized to the point that it's almost not water anymore.
It's a glass of bubbles, each of them technically independent. We wouldn't even look at them together if they weren't in the same vessel together. But we're sure as hell not as uniform as other societies might be. And to my point, I think, at least at the beginning, that's exactly how we wanted it. If anybody's ever studied early American history, there was more animosity between individual colonies than there was between the colonies as a whole in Britain. We have not liked each other from the beginning. We just always have been able to find an external group, the other, to bring our identity together enough to act as a common community. I'll be even more direct. American identity has always been at its strongest when we had an external enemy to kick the butt out of.
You look at anybody that's at war, Iran right now, instead of, people revolting,
But again,
warfare has the effect of bringing people together.
Look at the United States after September 11th.
Yeah.
The day after.
for 2.5 weeks,
The day after.
yeah, no, but I'll be honest, that was my first kind of experience with what we're talking about. And I remember I was just starting down the road of the political science lecture, so I was giving speeches and stuff on that. And I was reminded very clearly about the same dynamic existing 46 to 49 in the United States before the growth of the anti-communist movement. Then you get into civil rights, and then obviously Vietnam War just really detonates the whole thing, right? But man, those 5 years or so after the end of World War II, same dynamic. That's, I guess, the argument I'm making. And you brought up Iran. Again, I think Iran has a much clearer understanding, regardless of whether or not you believe they're extremists, if they're just, whatever you believe about the Iranian government. I think they have actually a clearer understanding of what they believe to be their allies and adversaries than we do. And so, I mean, and again, to me, that part of that is because of the amorphous nature of American citizen, American identity. Even if I say today, yeah, we are allies, and we're going to hold hands, and we're going to get those guys. Tomorrow, the markers that I believe are most important in my identity might literally shift me to him. Oh man, do you know what she said about you yesterday? I mean, listen, we've done that. I could go back to the Vietnam War. The idea that Nixon was calling the South Vietnamese government to make sure that they did not get on board with LBJ's peace plan so that Nixon could win. That really happened. The Iran-Contra, I could go on and on. We have absolutely kneecapped ourselves more than a few times in American diplomatic history. Absolutely. The other is an important aspect. If our identities are formed as Americans, counter to what we see as the other identities we don't want to engage, the other has actually played a disproportionate place in the evolution of American identity. First one, Native Americans. Forgive me, guys, but this entire, and I'm a Northeastern, so that's one of my biases. Call it an identity bias, whatever you want, but I've been here now. I spent about, 6, 7, 8 years in Nebraska. Now I've been here for 7 years, and I'm still trying to figure out some of the stuff in the middle American states compared to what I grew up with in the Northeast. And so like the pioneer kind of mentality and belief and culture, that's a real thing here. I just saw it in books and Warner Brothers cartoons when I was growing up. Daniel Boone, yeah, interesting, whatever, coonskin hat. That's a real thing here, right? The very notion of the pioneer culture as part of the American identity is absolutely built on what we saw as the necessary putting of the Native American in their place. And the more they fought back, the more we became tough, rugged, wilderness frontier folks, hacking our lives out of the wilderness. And that has been a dynamic that we have used over and over. So initially, it might have been Native Americans, then it was the enslaved African Americans. for the record, guys, I know, so I actually, the very first time I made this presentation was about 5-6 years ago, and actually I was right in this room when I gave it the first time, and it was very much kind of a, hey, can you talk a little bit about critical race theory? And now that might be in the clouds of time for some people. But 6-7 years ago, that was at the front of kind of cultural dynamic and identity politics in America. And one of the things that people don't understand, so critical race theory all began as a single focus. How has the history of racism in the United States impacted the evolution of legal systems within the United States? So that even though many of the racist dynamics have fallen away, civil rights movement, the impacts of that racism within the legal structure continue to manifest. That was the core of critical race theory. It expanded much beyond that once it really got rolling, but that's where it was supposed to start. And much of it comes back literally to before we're even talking about the development of the Constitution. Because some of the very first and most important legal systems in the United States were developed in southern states for no other reason to maintain control over the slave populations. And what's the first thing I have to do to make sure that the law applies to you, but not you? I need to clarify your identities relative to each other. What we understand to be African American today, Southern, Confederate, those are cultural identities that were developed over generation, hundreds of years. Again, that putting yourself in the other person's shoes. If I'm a slave owner, there are no real laws yet. We haven't even written the Constitution. But I've got to teach my son how to control the damn slaves. So there is a moment where my son's sitting on the wood fence watching me as I punish the slaves or control them or get them to work the field. In other words, racism, the identities associated with it, they're culturally developed and exchanged. And forgive me, in the same way that things like gender identities and roles are developed and exchanged. It's all a process. The laws just formalize the results of the competition. Externally, European empires are portrayed as corrupt, decadent, and tyrannical. We didn't know exactly what the American government was going to look like, as long as we knew it didn't look like that. So my key takeaway, from the start, American identity is built through moral contrast, not the creation of identity characteristics. It's not about who we are. It's about clarifying who we aren't. We define who we are by who we are not, both domestically and internationally. I'll pause there for a second. Thoughts? Questions?
So when you say that moral contrast and bold there, the two first words come to me is disrespect and basically just an unlevel playing field. Because you're like saying there's winners and losers. And that's why we hear Donald Trump, he's like, win, 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 win at all costs. And then you have people, even Jeff City, win, 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 if it's sports or if it's a golf game or if it's they go to the biggest church with the win with the highest number of people in the congregation. This win, mentality is like sets them up for a win identity. And which means the compromise is off the table, and anyone that doesn't compromise with the winners or on board with the winner train is automatically a loser. Like you're automatically a loser, you are the other, you're the enemy.
You've been reading Yankees broadcasts again, haven't you? I come over to the dark side, man. It's all right, bro. We got room.
It's cause and effect.
I agree with you. I agree with you. I guess the bottom line, and this is, again, guys, this is just assertions. This is not me, Dr. Watson's rule of blah, blah, blah. What if the result of not really having qualitative characteristics of American identity, religion? I know some people want to truly believe religion's at the heart of American identity, but it's not. It's not. Okay? And in fact, part of the whole purpose of the Constitution was recognizing at the time, much more than we do now, the diversity of religious beliefs that made up American society and culture. I didn't know. Did you know that by the founding of the Constitution, the writing of the Constitution, there were 7 synagogues in the Northeast? Mm-hmm. Judaism had already taken significant root in those spaces. I mean, you look at a religious distribution map of the early colonies, you'll be shocked at just how different the different religious, because again, I'd get there and, okay, I kind of like your version of Protestant, but I also want to do this and this. So we're going to move a little deeper into the state. Then you get the Mormons. Hey, man, we don't think any of y'all doing it right. We're going to go halfway across the country. And again, to my original point, the one thing none of those groups ever had to do, even for a moment, was compromise their identity, be part of the American citizenry. But it was only because there was no definition. It was an open box you could plug into in whatever way you wanted, and as long as you followed the basic rules, taxes, you were good. So, at the founding and until the 14th Amendment, citizenship was predominantly determined by varying state laws. Specifically, the concept of national citizenship was a byproduct of your state citizenship. And I need to be clear, this was not just, the average citizen, but the people in DC were still, no. This was also how the representatives in DC saw themselves and their constituents. They weren't there as one of many representing American politics and interests. They were there to represent Virginians or Pennsylvanians or New Yorkers. That's one of the reasons why Abraham Lincoln is one of the most important, if not the most important president in American history. But even he has some interesting components to how he saw this. I discovered a quote from him when I was working on some other presentations that really threw me for a loop. It was about 1864, and it was starting to become obvious that the end of the Civil War was going to conclude with a Union victory. And so increasingly, Lincoln's primary focus was on Reconstruction. What was the post-Civil War America going to look like? Especially from this concept of the newly freed slave. And so a reporter asked him directly, so, do you think that the newly freed slave will ever be able to, live in peace and freedom with the white American? And he said, honestly, no, I do not. For whatever reason, the white American has a peculiar distaste for the African. It would be best if they all went back to Africa. I don't know if you guys understand that, but that was Lincoln's primary Reconstruction platform, was to get as many Africans as possible to go back and found Liberia, because he just didn't believe that the racial mixture would ultimately work after the Civil War. It was one of the primary issues between him and Frederick Douglass. He didn't necessarily disagree with Douglass's perspectives on post-Civil War race. He just didn't think in any way that Douglass's idea of a interracial America was ever going to manifest. Thank you. I'm sorry. Again. Oh, I'm past too. Yes, please.
But this goes way back to your idea that we are geographically insulated, because from what I'm hearing, the idea is going to be not to physically attack us from abroad, but to internally attack us in cybersecurity
And
methods. And for that matter, I mean, it would not be that difficult for a bunch of enemy cells to have drones that went and.
so, ironically, one of the things, and we brought it up now a couple times, is that Americans generally don't trust each other. Right? One of the practical outcomes of that is that we actually have dozens of different electrical and communication grids across the country. In other words, most of our systems are isolated in one form or another. They might be able to get to one power plant, but they're not going to be able to affect the grid. They might be able to get to one city's transportation, but they're not going to be able to affect the entire grid. We've actually created artificial walls. It's one of the reasons why, quite frankly, that we haven't been hit with as massive a cyber attack as has taken place in some European countries, because they do have more integrated systems. And even more directly, I don't know if anybody's aware, the single biggest barrier to improving cybersecurity within the United States is the unwillingness of private companies to actually tell you when they've been attacked. Because Americans are actually more concerned with economic viability than we are security. That's the truth of it. Yeah, I might want to know if my information was compromised and everything, but at the same time, for God's sake, don't put that out there and get the stock tanked. No. Fix it inside, figure it out. Yeah, and for the record, I was one of those people that was impacted by 9/11 that literally fundamentally altered my entire academic career. Originally, I was international relations with a focus on theory, would take students every year to spend 2 weeks down at the United Nations. And so that was my passion. Post 9/11, all of a sudden I'm doing international security and terrorism studies. So I was one of those people that was impacted. But the short answer, we're actually less vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks precisely because of our size, as well as the degree to which Americans tend not to share with other Americans unless we absolutely have to. I'm sorry, am I being cynical again? I'll shut up. All right, real quick, I know I'm sorry. I tend to go over, but at the same time, I'll take it as a very positive that none of you have gotten up and run for the doors yet. So I'll finish it up real quick here. The point of this is to show that there's been an evolution of this concept of birthright citizenship. And first and foremost, the original birthright concept was on the state level and not the national level. It was not until the 14th Amendment in 1868 that the concept, a true concept of national citizenship was created. Now, you have to understand the context. Because if it had been, hell, even in the current environment, yes, there's contention and everything, but we're not talking about a period where I'm fighting for the identity of an enormous group of people who literally just got freed from slavery. I cannot explain to you how different the context was. It was not just about who should be a citizen and who not. It was literally about redefining the very notion of black. I tell my students literally, before the 1868 14th Amendment, you were black and you might have a flavor of free on the front. The next day, the concept of the African American identity was born. And why is it so important? Because the moment in the United States you see that little hyphen and then the word America, it is a legal recognition of your identity. Everything changed. That's why, again, you want to study, for my 2 cents, yes, World War II, critical moment in American history, same with Vietnam. But I would actually argue that the most important point in American history to understand where we are today with things like race relations and identity politics is the age of Reconstruction. Unbelievable. The changes that took place. And then the counter changes that led to the development of Jim Crow. That 10, 15, 20, and that's just from the race and identity politics. Look at the evolution of government. People's complaints about big government today, it's all born from the Civil War and Reconstruction. Fascinating period of time. So one thing real quick, a lot of people like to talk about, so the Dred Scott decision, again, was important not just because obviously it excluded blacks from being citizens, but to do that, again, similar to the other discussion, you had to start to define what a citizen was. And so there's a reason, interestingly enough, why you start to see overlaps between the black plight and fight for civil rights and the growing call for similar rights by poor, unlanded whites. That's why one of the dynamics in the South throughout the post-Civil War period up to and through the Civil Rights era was fighting to make sure that your minority populations and your poor populations didn't start to realize how much they actually had in common. The single hardest thing to do was to make sure that no matter how poor a Southern white was at the time, they still saw themselves as better than the average black. That was the only way they were going to maintain the power structures. This Wong Kim Ark versus United States, that's the agreement that specifically set, yes, even if you're foreign, if your kid's born on this soil, they're an American citizen. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was actually a case brought by a Chinese American. Because now to this day, that's the primary argument that Trump is using against birthright citizenship. This is a degree to which he believes Chinese in particular are coming here and taking advantage of the law. So, conclusions. Yes, I do have some. Okay. America will always experience higher levels of conflict driven by identity politics because we will never develop a single definition of American citizen. Let me be clear. I'm not saying we haven't developed that. I started with that argument. I'm actually saying here that we will never, ever have a common identity, national identity, that's anything close like British or French, Lebanese, Jamaican. Please push back this is just me arguing, throwing theoretical conclusions out. Conclusion 2. Diversity has expanded the players on the field, but the real conflict will be over the expansion of equity as the foundation of social relations. It is one thing to say, okay, I'm going to recognize transgender. Okay. And a whole nother thing to then respond to the transgender requirements. Fine. As part of equity, you now need to work to create legal systems to make up for the impacts of discrimination that my population have faced throughout time. It is the argument driving reparations for African Americans since the end of the Civil War. It is one thing, just because you now have a box in the damn census that I can check, doesn't mean you've actually addressed the inequality. Let me be clear. It is not the simple demand that you recognize my identity that's driving everybody crazy. If all illegal immigrants wanted was to be recognized, I actually don't think it'd be a very big argument. It's the degree to which that recognition leads to healthcare, jobs, other benefits from the society that cause people to go, oh, you can call yourself whatever you want, but it doesn't mean you're getting that out of the machine. Go ahead.
Is there a particular reason you use the word equity rather than equal?
Yes.
I have it in my own mind, but I'd like to hear.
Equal. Equity is a process. Equal is a statement of situation. Equity requires that you recognize what might need to be given to me in order to then create equality. That's the fundamental difference. And so I use the analogy. When I was growing up, my mom used to like to say all the time, listen, African American, you have to understand that when you're running the rat race, and again, it's a term that I grew up with the term rat race. I don't know. When you're running the rat race, understand the average African American is starting the race halfway when it's halfway done, and you're going to have to run twice as hard to get twice as far, and you still might not win the race. But you have to go into it knowing that. That was the narrative I was given. I actually wrote a piece when I was doing research in the space, and what I argue is that the problem with that is that, in fact, the United States history is made up of more than one race, and that the winner of each race not only got the rewards, but then set the terms of the next race. So the first race was colonization. What was the award? You got to write the Constitution. The next race was the expansion of the American system. And since really it was just white males on a horseback with a cowboy hat, they won that race too. Now, what was interesting, and again, forgive me, but I do believe this. A lot of people seem to think that race relations and race conflict in America is this black-white thing. Not even remotely. Every major racial issue part of this history of this country has been white folks against white folks, with the majority of minorities sitting on the edge going, who's going to win? There has never been a single piece of civil rights legislation in the history of the United States that was passed with the black vote being the difference. Ever. Hell, even the NAACP was founded by white lawyers who wanted to fight for the cause. For every slave owner, there were 5 abolitionists, and they were all white. This has been a predominant fight between the white culture in America. And again, a lot of it goes back to these earliest origins. Who are we? And so we all just kind of sat in different rooms going, we're all American. And then you peeked into the room next door and realized those Americans happen to be owning slaves. But they're calling themselves Americans just like you. What do I do? Well, I'll just live my life. I'll stay up here in Massachusetts. And over time, you can't ignore it anymore. Good.
Well, the present administration believes it's overdone the expansion of equity, and actually, people are being discriminated against now. So you hunt for instances where equity has been unfair to white people.
And again, I need to be clear. This is not the demonization of the white man. So I've used this analogy in my classes, and it's kind of shocked some people, but hear me out. It is the middle of the 16th century. Everything that is European society at the time is actually African. Everything that you understand to be African society at the time is actually European. So a bunch of blacks from Africa get on some boats, land on the coast of France, capture some white Frenchmen, enslave them, and bring them to the United States to start the plantations. The rest of American history unfolds as we understand it. I guarantee you blacks would have the same dynamics of superiority as whites do. I don't think it's a racial dynamic that, only whites do. No, you find yourself in a position of power. Again, in my analogy, if you had a bunch of blacks getting off boats from Africa with rifles, modern ships, and the Europeans were running around in loincloths with spears, roles would have been reversed. And there'd be a white guy up here talking to a black audience right now. Forgive me, I go places other people don't. But okay, I just want to make sure I get through the rest of this real quick, and then I'll talk as long as you guys want. Third conclusion. The history of racial and gender discrimination will continue to produce more intense conflict and identity politics due to the need for equity to address the existing legacies of discrimination. In other words, it is a natural cycle within American politics that as more people are empowered, recognizing their identities that might not have been recognized previously, gaining rights of protection they might not have had previously. It is only natural that they're not going to sit back and go, okay, that was enough. That's all I needed. No, they're going to keep asking for more until the equity process produces what they believe to be equality. For the record, the only reason the Native Americans don't lead this charge is because we killed 97% of them. And I'm sorry, little things like we're exceptional. Don't mention that. We do that. Why? Things like the Native American. You do understand that the treatment of the Native Americans over those 150 years represents the single greatest genocide in human history. Dwarfs the Holocaust in its impact. But we can't admit that, which means that we won't worry about forcing Turkey to admit their genocide against the Albanians because, we don't want to open the door. Yeah, right? Finally, the reason all of this is happening is because two contradictory trends. First, many, including, I would argue, probably predominantly from the left, increasing pressure towards an aggregated national identity through diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yes, one of the dynamics I'll be interested, guys, I'm already actually thinking about 2, 4, 6 years down the road. There's a certain part that's like, man, we are where we are right now. Just figure it out. I'm interested to see what happens to the rubber band after the next presidential election. How much will it snap back? I'll just take my higher ed perspective.
I lost multiple programs in the anti-DI efforts. We're looking at potential cuts to education funds, on and on. I mean, the idea, and I don't know if everybody in this room is aware, the idea that Lincoln University, a historical Black college and university, had to remove the word diversity from some of our formal documents to avoid unnecessary federal and, I'm going to be honest, state treatment of us. That's like if a woman organization wants to make sure it gets its funding, it's got to take out all references to menstrual cycle. Like, Jesus, like, what are we talking about here? So I have to deny a very part of who I am in order for you to then accept my identity enough to give me what I should be getting from society anyway? Okay. So to me, that's a critical issue. And I'll be honest, I feel like right now, I know where we are. I think I was telling somebody before we started about a study abroad program. It got cut. Interestingly, it was a study abroad program that was actually sponsored by the United States Central Intelligence Agency. After 9/11, the very first thing that was concluded by the 9/11 committee, I don't know if anybody remembers that, the first thing they concluded was the primary reason why we were struck is because our intelligence communities did not have dynamic enough thought processes and analytics. We did not have enough diversity within those areas. We had individuals that had never been out of the southern United States analyzing things that they were intercepting from Middle Eastern groups. They're literally analyzing with the context they use in their local towns, right? And so they missed it. You add that, the fact that FBI didn't talk to CIA, didn't talk to DHS, whole nother issue. So they started this program. And the whole point of it was a recognition that national security required a much more dynamic thought process amongst its intelligence analysts. The program was killed precisely because it had the word diversity in it. And so I've got no study abroad program this year. I had another one. It was being supported by a group called CISA, which is our kind of national cybersecurity infrastructure security agency. And it was a K through 12 program. I ran it right here at JC High School and Capital City High. And it allowed me to take students. We would have monthly cybersecurity workshops. And then I took them to Worldwide Technologies headquarters in St. Louis. We had a whole day and they got to look at all the systems. Axed. Because it was said it was promoting DEI. So there's a part of me that's like, okay, we are where we are. My interest now is how much of this is going to snap back? One of the interesting dynamics of American politics, and I'm going to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I think we're seeing what we're seeing with the Trump administration in particular, populism is not meant to drive the car. Populism is meant to sit in the back seat yelling at the people driving the car about how poorly they're driving. Populism is never meant to be a fully guiding system of government, precisely because populism tends to be driven mostly by emotional responses to perceptions of weakness or struggle within the society. The classic example, Hugo Chavez. I mean, he was the modern symbol. And Trump is a populist. That's one of his great strengths. You might not like it, God knows I don't, but the man has a unique ability to read some social media stuff and go, yeah, my people are really pissed about this today. Let me go on and post something and get them riled up and I'll get this attack. He's a master political strategist in that regard. The only thing that saves us is he's got no vision. So literally, he'll wake up tomorrow, it's like a freaking hamster, and he's got 4 minutes, right? He doesn't even remember what he did yesterday. Oh, God, do you know how much trouble we'd be in if he actually had strategic chops to put things together? Thank God he's playing checkers. Just let him keep thinking, oh, I'm playing three-dimensional chess. No, that's just you folded the board in half. Come on, just relax. But I'm telling you that don't underestimate the man's ability to capture the popular sentiment. It's the only reason he's in office. Again, he had nothing to bring to the table except what he believed were people's disdain and anger over Biden. Go ahead, sir.
Do you
you have a guess about how much the rubber band will rebound?
So, and again, this is for the record, I love thinking about this stuff. My wife doesn't like hearing about that stuff, but I love thinking about this stuff. I think it'll rebound a little bit, but in a somewhat disconnected way. My 2 cents. I think, first, let me be clear. I believe that my children, actually my grandchildren, my kids are now getting out of high school, going to college. I think my grandchildren will end up studying Trump in a similar way that I ended up studying FDR. Guys, whether we want to admit it or not, we are in the era of Donald Trump. This is a period of American history where his impact has been so deep and so broad that there are entire dynamics. You will not be able to talk about U.S. foreign policy during the 2020s without understanding Donald Trump's psychology. Now, whether or not I think will NATO go, you guys had a really bad night last night, huh? Glad you're back in the fold. Welcome. Let's re-sign these documents. After the first one, I think they're like, okay, we know every once in a while Americans go off the rails. Just let them run around the backyard half naked yelling at the moon, and they'll come back and they'll do everything right. It was the re-election of Trump that absolutely changed the dynamic, because now Europeans, and definitely another one of those, are you watching the markers moments? I read a report that basically said that China has actually decreased its overflights of Taiwan by 75% over the last 3 months. They know what the American war in Iran looks like. And they are smart enough to understand that all they have to, again, identity, all they have to do is not be that guy, and they'll gain collateral on the international scene. The very idea that China is being floated as a mediator between Iran and the United States, man, I'm down the rabbit hole. Like, we're in a whole different place. So do I think it's going to snap back? I do think there will be some comeback, but it ain't going to look like it did 5 years ago. To me, the one, and I'll throw this out there, the one big trend that I've already seen, and again, New Yorker, moved to Nebraska after I graduated with the PhD, and now I'm here. I think what we're going to see is an increasing era of regionalism in the United States. You are going to see, whether we're talking about immigration, basic rights, quality of education, taxes, I mean, just about every major component of American society, I think you're going to see an increasing critical difference between various regions and how they engage those issues. So to answer your question, I think, for instance, I think places like the Northeast or the West and the Northwest, it'll come back with a vengeance. They will go out of their way to reinstitute certain programs, DEI-based. It might not be called DEI, but you'll see a scramble. I'm hoping, for instance, that you'll see a massive reversal of the reduction of NSF funding for research, things like that. But do I think it's going to be a universal, national, oh man, let's all reinvest in our education system? Pfft. Place like Georgia are going to be like, yeah, we didn't do that anyway. You know what I mean? And so I think there'll be some snapback, but I don't think it's going to be uniform. And I think it's going to really emphasize a regionalism within the United States. The final thing to think about, guys, increasing exposure of people at the extremes of identity politics as they are compelled to more aggressively resist threats to their understanding of fixed identities and associated power dynamics. As we have an increasing call from certain groups, and I would argue that it exists on both the right and the left, even though it has fundamentally different philosophies. But both the right and the left have parts of their group that are calling for, why can't we all just be American? I believe one of you talked about it earlier. Why do we have to have these distinctions? Why can't we just see this uniform identity and understanding of who we are as a people? And I think various ways that exists on both the right and the left.
So there is, again, just my argument, there is this tension on part of the American populace to create a more uniform understanding of who we are. A shared identity that really says American. The paradox is, the moment you have aggregation in the center, the extremes become more pronounced. And I hate to say it, folks, but I see this dynamic in Jeff City very clearly. I'm going to tell you, I've told people, like, I'm like, when I try and explain to people, like some of my friends back in New York and things, what it's like to live here. That didn't come out exactly the way. No, because you have to. Okay, listen. I know y'all have some, and go back where I started. I know y'all Southerners have some stereotypes about New Yorkers. We all, yeah, okay. What I didn't realize is that we have stereotypes of y'all as well. And so it's just like this back and forth and exchange. So yeah, I do get, wow, Missouri, huh? Like, oh, well, truthfully, a lot. Like New Yorkers, I saw a great line the other day. New Yorkers are really helpful because we can't stand that you're in the way. So we are glad to help you figure out that map so you'll get out of the way. You know, that's kind of the New Yorker mentality. But it's just, so I've been to the Ozarks one time.
Oh, that's not even Southeast. No.
Oh no, well when I first moved here, I had, welcome, but yeah, don't go to the Ozarks by yourself. Like what? Like what? Like that's what my New Yorker friends would say about Missouri. Don't go to Missouri by yourself. You know, like so now I'm hearing it. But then I went down, and you want to talk about the irony? I'm literally going to do a presentation on Ferguson. It was 10 years after. I went to Ferguson, walked around the community, interviewed people because I wanted to see what the 10 years after was like. And then I was asked to do this by Judge Cotton, who's one of the main guys on it. So then I drove down to the Ozarks to give my presentation. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm thinking like, all right, do I have my PowerPoint together? Am I ready? And then I drive by the biggest Confederate flag I've ever seen in my life. And it's like trying to get, I'm going to be perfectly frank with you guys. They might as well had a sign that said, go home inward. I have the same visceral reaction to the Confederate flag that I believe a Jew must have to seeing a swastika. You know, and trying to explain that to the average person, I have never gone back to the Ozarks since. Drove past some really cool golf courses that I would have liked to try, and I still can't convince myself to go back down because I don't know who I'm going to be talking to. And so that's me, yeah.
Hey, we need to
I'm sorry, we're kicking. Guys.
This is great. This is great. A lot very close to the
Ah, okay. So, like I said to you before, Ben, and I hope I have proven it in spades. I love to talk. I love to talk about this stuff. I find it fascinating. So please invite me back.
those of you who have questions, just for Sue's going to close us out here in a minute. But those of you who want to talk, I'm sure Dr. Watson would be happy to chat with you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you.
Is your presentation out on the internet? Do you have a link on it?
No, what I'll do is I'll send it to one of these folks. You mean the PowerPoint?
Yeah, just
Yep.
what you have there.
I can send it.
I have a teacher that was, she teaches at the JC.